Are you struggling to incorporate world building elements into your story without overwhelming your reader with too much information? Whether your story unfolds on another planet or in a magical fantasy realm or with just a different twist on our own reality, world building is a difficult balancing act. But here's the thing. While creating an engaging world is very important, it's also easy to go overboard with information and lose your reader's interest before they even get into the story. That's why in today's video, I am doing something that I've never done before. I am going to give you an exclusive sneak peek at my expansive live training, Worldbuilding 101. This live training dives deep into the science of crafting an engaging, memorable fictional world without overwhelming your readers or yourself while you're writing it. I've combined every powerful and valuable lesson that I've learned about world building into this training, including how to leverage your story world to deepen your character's internal conflict, my secret hack for effortlessly writing exposition through action, how to write immersive setting descriptions without slowing down your story's pacing, how to organize the details of your world and keep track of everything, and the best way to curate a one-of-a-kind vibe for your story world and have fun doing it. So let's dive into part 1 right now and tackle the most challenging aspect of world building, which is connecting it to your character, making your reader immediately care about the world building because of why it matters to the characters. Okay, so before we dive into the different parts of this training, I just first want to refresh real quick about the do's and don'ts of world building. First, don't info dump all the world building at the beginning of your story and overwhelm us. Do expand your world as your character interacts with it. So exposition through action, that's what we're going to talk about today in more detail. Don't make your characters' conflicts begin and end with the way the world works. Do leverage the way the world works to make your characters' unique inner conflicts more compelling. Don't paint yourself into a corner with the rules of your world. Do stay consistent with your world's rules, but leave room for new possibilities. Don't slow down your story's pacing with wordy descriptions of the world. Do make your descriptions vivid and meaningful to the story, so keep things moving forward. Okay, so let's get into it. Key number 1, how to leverage your story world to deepen your character's internal conflict. This is something that when you start researching about world building, I don't see a lot of writers talk about this leveraging the internal conflict with the external conflict. We're going to take our world building to the next level with this. So, just like we discussed with the do's and don'ts of world building, it's essential that your character's conflicts don't begin and end with the way the world works, okay? So society and the world can be against them, but you must ensure your character's conflict is strong enough to stand alone, even outside the world they find themselves in. Okay, so if we saw these characters outside their world, would we still care about them? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Would we understand their goals, fears, and the fatal flaw tripping them up? If we put them in a different world, would they still have personal struggles? So this is all about making your character's struggles personal on top of everything that they're dealing with because of the world that they find themselves in. So you can leverage these two things together, okay? This is a vital question. All of these questions are vital to ask yourself to test the strength of your character's internal conflict. Because if we take them out of the world and suddenly they have no internal conflict because the world itself was the only thing that made them special, that made us care about them, then I challenge you to dig deeper and see if you can make it even more personal. Could this character have personal conflicts even outside of this world? Or if they were to be uprooted and placed in a different world, would they still have personal struggles? Would they still have a fatal flaw? Would they still have a desire and a fear and a misbelief? So, questions to ask yourself. Now, when it comes to building this world that your character finds themselves in, and I talk about mind maps, don't get scared because I'm not going to give you a mind map like this. Okay, when you start looking up world building mind maps and how to world build, you might see something that looks like this and be immediately overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to outline all of this without ripping my hair out? I'm not going to give you a mind map that looks like this, or like this, or like this. So don't panic. My goal is not to overwhelm you with a chaotic world building mind map like this. I personally would be overwhelmed by a mind map like this. It would be crazy to have to sit down and figure all that out because of this one simple thing. For instance, look at this one. We have like the creation, the beginning. That's where this mind map is starting. The creation in the beginning, and then that goes down into geography and population and history. And from there, we break down all these different aspects of the world. This is overwhelming because, first of all, it's a lot to think about. But second of all, and more importantly, it's starting with geography, population, and history, not a character, right? So what matters? What's my point of reference for any of this mattering? Why do I need to know about the species and the natural laws and the natural history and oral history if it doesn't matter to a specific individual character? Okay. So we're going to dig down into what's below the surface. We're going to do this a little bit differently because your character's journey of change, like we always talk about, is the most important aspect of your story. Okay, it's what makes us care and keeps us reading. So you can develop every aspect of your story world, like the gods and the natural laws and the politics and all of that, and still have no story because you didn't develop the conflict below the surface. Okay, so we're going to take it from a different perspective today. We're going to do a world building mind map, but we're going to start from the perspective of the protagonist. So that being said, this is what the mind map template I'm going to give you today looks like. We begin with the protagonist. I like to think of it as like these three bubbles. You could even put these bubbles inside of each other and have them expand from each other. But for the sake of laying this out on the screen, I did them side by side. So first we have this bubble here that is the protagonist's inner world. Okay, this is what we always talk about on my channel. We have the protagonist, we have their desire, their fear, their misbelief. Okay, their desire and their fear stems from their misbelief, so the misbelief is at the root of who they are. I'm going to show you an example of this filled out in a minute. But if we explore from here into what I like to call the small world is an extension of the protagonist's reality. So we have their occupation, what they do for a living, or what they do all day, every day. We have social struggles that they face. We have the class that they find themselves in this society, their place in the world. Okay, all these three things do have an impact on them, and they are more important because they're in the small world of that protagonist's personal reality rather than the grander global reality that everyone faces. Okay, then we have characters. We have friendships, family, enemies. You can extend from there. You could go into love interests, sidekicks, mentors, whatever the case may be. But these are just some basic bubbles to get you started with this mind map. And then we have the big world. So the big world is outside the small world and way outside the inner world, but it still has some repercussions and effects on the protagonist. So we have the government. The government is influenced by culture, by religion, science. All these things are kind of interconnected. We have history. Legends are influencing history, and maybe we have magic, or maybe we have technology. It depends on the world that you're building. It depends on the genre you're writing. It depends, with science fiction, you might have a bigger focus on technology rather than magic. In fantasy, you might have a bigger focus on magic. Okay, so whatever the case may be, you can really customize this and even make your own mind map that is sort of like this with as many bubbles and as many deviations as you want. You can make this as big or as small as you want. But I want you to start from the perspective of the inner world, because the inner world is what we care about, right? It's what matters the most to us because we can see what matters to the protagonist. And that's where a lot of writers go wrong, is they start too big. They start with the big world and then they start zooming in. Okay, then we have the small world of these people. And then within this group of people, we have one person that we pluck out of the chaos, and that is our protagonist. But I want you to think of it as reversing that whole process. We are starting with the protagonist. We see what they care about. We see what matters personally to them and would continue to matter to them even if we took them out of this world. And then we start to expand and explore from there. Okay. So where a lot of writers go wrong is they start focusing too much on things like culture, history, politics, religions, which is fine. That is all good stuff to dig into and develop for your world to make it really feel real and lived in. But remember, culture, history, politics, and religions are what create societal conflict, okay? You see this even in the real world, even in our world. Beliefs, opinions, fears, and desires create personal conflict. So the personal conflict is the thing that we are really caring about, right? Outside of the bigness of everything. So I want to show you what this looks like in an actual story example. And we're going to do this sort of like workshopping it. So we're going to actually develop a story world from scratch today, starting with the protagonist. So let's say we're writing a science fiction story. We'll call it Starborn Deception. This is loosely based off of a story prompt I created for my story smoothie video. So if you saw that video, you remember this prompt probably. If not, I will link the video in the resource kit. And I made up this prompt basically by blending ingredients from Pride and Prejudice, Mulan, and Star Wars. So if you know my story smoothie method, it's basically a process of taking inspiration and little ingredients from stories that you really love and that get you excited, putting them in a blender and creating something entirely new from it. So using these three stories, the genre, plot, characters, and kind of blending them together, we came up with this. Our protagonist is Yumi, a rebellious engineer or inventor who has spent her life raising her three younger sisters after a plague took their parents' lives. When her sisters mysteriously disappear, Yumi must disguise herself to infiltrate the oppressive astronarchy and elite space force to rescue them. While undercover, Yumi must fool the esteemed General Zento as she forms unexpected alliances within the astronarchy, all while confronting her deep-seated fear of abandonment. Okay, so we have internal conflict, external conflict. As she unveils a sinister forces plot for galactic domination, Yumi sparks a transformation within the astronarchy and inspires a revolution. Okay, so sounds like your typical science fiction, right? You guys probably know I'm not a science fiction writer, but I wanted to challenge myself and get outside my comfort zone and try to develop this story from scratch. Using just this simple prompt, I came up with a few plot points for the story and some internal conflict, external conflict. So we have the different levels of this world. If I were to take this prompt and build it out with the mind map we just looked at, it might look something like this. So here's an example of it in action. We have our protagonist, Yumi, right? We have her desire to keep her sisters safe. That's the basic goal of the story. And then we have her fear, which is abandonment, which came from her parents dying in the plague, okay? So her misbelief beneath all of this is, I can't trust others to protect me. That would be like the basic overarching misbelief. Okay, and then we have the small world. So in the small world, we have Yumi. She's an engineer, an inventor, and she's a working class woman, but she's going to be living in this society that's kind of loosely based off like the society in Pride and Prejudice, which is, you know, this Regency kind of patriarchy where women have to get married, and they're kind of like, if a working class woman is unmarried, she's kind of stigmatized. So we're going to borrow some of those aspects from that world and that society for this world. So we have this character who resists social conventions. So she's a little bit like Mulan. She's a little bit like Elizabeth Bennet in that way, kind of a mixture of the two. And then we have her family and characters. So maybe she has a coworker, BFF, who's like based off of Charlotte Lucas. She has three younger sisters, no parents. And then for enemies, probably General Zento character will be an enemy, as well as anybody in the astronarchy who's like the evil force, right? So that's her small world, an extension of her inner world. Now we have the big world. And the big world, we have oppressive government controlled by the astronarchy. We have military forces exploit science. Okay, caste system degrades workers and women. So again, that plays off of her place in society. So we're tying all of this together, giving it personal meaning. Maybe we have religion is forbidden by the astronarchy. Maybe we have history is rewritten in favor of the astronarchy. So everything is sort of being controlled by this oppressive government, right? And maybe legends are the real history. So we have different layers to the history here. And then for technology, maybe technology is controlled by the Astronarchy. So that would also come into play with Yumi's personal life, right? Because she's an engineer, she's building this high-tech stuff that's illegal for her to be doing. So now that puts her into a place of conflict with the big world. So as you develop this, I want you to just look for places where you can challenge yourself to make some aspect of the big world personally significant in the small world. Okay? So depending on who your character is, look for those opportunities where how can I make the big world have a personal impact on the small world and then the inner world of my main character. And this is balancing that line between plot and character. Okay, so as we develop this story world, you can see how the most crucial aspect here is the main character and her personal, unique internal conflict. So it's not enough that Yumi is a working class engineer in an oppressive caste system that treats women as the property of their husbands, conscripts unmarried women for the Astronarchy, and doesn't welcome female entrepreneurs. Okay, why is this not enough? Because we could be following any female character who is trying to be an engineer and dodge the draft, and the stakes would be the same. Okay, this is the point I've made a lot with plot-driven stories. If you can replace the main character with any other character, then it's not character-driven enough. So what makes Yumi unique is not the big world, but her personal inner world, her motivation to keep her sisters safe, to be the one person they can trust in this unpredictable and cruel world, to give them the sense of security that she lost when her parents died and she felt abandoned. Okay, so automatically, you see how that's like way more powerful? That automatically makes this story like way more. I would even be interested in reading this story, and I'm not much of a science fiction reader because we have character-driven elements here. Okay, so taking this one step further, how can we use the world to leverage conflict? So Yumi has multiple layers to her conflict already. She is an unmarried woman in a man's world, an engineer slash inventor in a society that stigmatizes working class women, and she's determined to dodge the draft and stay out of the Astronarchy without getting married. Okay, so that's one way to get out of it, but she doesn't want to get married because she's based off Elizabeth Bennet. So, and she's going to help her sisters do the same. So, given these specific conflicts, what would push her outside her comfort zone? AKA, what's the worst thing that can happen to her specifically? And this is something you can even do if you haven't fully plotted your book yet, but you want to sort of use the world to create that conflict and create the plot. You can prompt yourself with these same questions. Okay, now setting up this world, what's the worst thing that could happen to this character? What can push her outside her comfort zone and become the inciting incident? I came up with this answer: to lose her sisters to the Astronarchy and to feel responsible for it. Okay, so that would probably be pretty difficult for her to deal with. This inciting incident would also set in motion all the external conflicts that I have planned for this story. So we're going to take that inciting incident. We're actually going to write a piece of it in the next part. But first, I want to just quickly say something about contemporary, because world building can apply, all of this same stuff can apply to contemporary as well. So if you're writing contemporary, you might be thinking, can I world build? Can I make things this intricate? Yes, absolutely, you can. Now, when you're writing a story that takes place in the real world, you can skip some of the exposition because your readers understand how society and nature work, okay? And you'll have more time to focus on specific aspects of your protagonist's small world, their inner world as well, which usually makes contemporary stories more character-driven than other genres. That's probably why, because we've already set up the world. We understand the world. Now we can get deeper into the small world. However, you can still use the world building mind map to craft unique and immersive story world. You still need to figure out what is possible and what is impossible for your characters within their bubble of reality. Okay, so for example, when I was writing The Other World, which sounds like it would be a fantasy almost, but you guys know it's a contemporary, it takes place in the real world. And when I was writing it, I had to really figure out and like draw the lines of my protagonist's small world to understand the aspects of the big world that had a direct impact on her life. Okay, so in Orca's case, who's my protagonist, nature was more influential to her than society because she was kind of cut off from society. She has grown up on this island all by herself with her father, and she's not really part of normal society. So because of that, I had to draw the boundaries of, okay, what is her world like? In fact, the whole basis of the story is kind of starting from this place of she's in this world and the other world is out there, and she feels like it's this mysterious thing she wants to know more about because it's so outside of her small world. Okay, so find different ways that you can leverage this and do this with your contemporary story if you're writing contemporary. Okay, prompts for this section. First, what is my protagonist's inner world, small world, and big world? And you can use the mind map to craft this. Also, how does my story world force my protagonist into a uniquely difficult situation because of their internal conflict? Something important to think about. And if we saw this character outside their world, would we still care about them? Would we understand their goals, fears, and fatal flaw that's tripping them up? Okay, let's get into key number 2. I know that was a lot I just went over, but we have a lot more to explore. First, mastering the art of exposition through action. So what we want to do here is keep the momentum going. There's nothing like a wordy info dump to kill the pacing of your story and overwhelm your reader. Okay, you've probably experienced this many times when opening up a new book or starting a film and being overwhelmed with information. So it's essential to make sure that you don't hit pause on your story for too long to give us some exposition about the world. Instead, let's find a way to show and not tell the need-to-know information through action. So we're not slamming the brakes on your story's momentum, okay? And my hack for doing this is to ask myself 2 questions, and the answer to these 2 questions becomes the scene. Okay, so first, what needs to be accomplished right now for the plot to move forward? And what aspects of the world is the reader asking questions about? Okay, so those 2 questions, once you have the answers to those 2 questions, weave them together into a single scene without pausing for too long to explain things to the reader. Okay, so once you have the answers, like we know what needs to be accomplished for the plot to move forward, and we know what questions the reader is asking, we can weave that into a single scene. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. But first, my golden rule of exposition. I want you to adopt this as your golden rule. If it ain't asked, don't answer it. Okay, where most writers go wrong with exposition is when they start answering questions that the reader hasn't even asked. This is like giving us the punchline to a joke before telling the joke, okay? It kills curiosity. Curiosity is your secret weapon for keeping your reader hooked. Brain science literally shows that curiosity triggers this pleasure and rewards center in our brain and encourages the release of dopamine, similar to the effect of using an addictive drug. Okay, they've literally studied this and watched brain scans of what curiosity does to your brain. It's amazing. So if you leverage curiosity the right way, you can literally make your reader addicted to your story. Seriously. But balancing that curiosity reward ratio can be a tricky thing. So we're going to look at what that magic ratio is now. And you've probably heard me talk about this before. I talked about it in my flashback live training with revealing questions and answers. What I've found as a reader is that the magic ratio is for the curiosity reward is like 2 to 1, as in we have twice as many questions as we have answers, but we are continually rewarded piece by piece with answers, so that dopamine is still firing in our brain and we want to keep reading. But the thing is, if you never reward your reader with answers to their questions, you'll confuse the heck out of them, right? And a confused mind always says no. Closes the book, puts it back on the shelf. You don't want that. But on the flip side, if you give your reader too many answers before they get curious, we'll be overwhelmed by all this information. We're not ready to digest it, okay? We're not hungry for it, so we're not ready to digest it. Remember, we get satisfaction from putting the pieces together and seeing the fuller picture and feeling like we created that picture. We participated in finding those pieces and putting them together in the right way. Okay, so in case you don't know, I'm going to show you what info dumping looks like. We're going to use our story example here of our sci-fi story that we started developing. And if I were to write a paragraph, it's terrible, so brace yourself. That was info dumping everything I wanted to tell you. It might look something like this. In the sprawling metropolis of Shinmeido, where the iridescent glow of holographic billboards painted the night sky, Yumi, an ingenious young engineer, meticulously fine-tuned her revolutionary holographic invention within the confines of her clandestine workshop. The cityscape outside her window pulsated with life, but beneath its dazzling facade lurked the oppressive grip of the astronarchy, a technological monolith that had ruthlessly seized control of the government, ensnaring the once free society in a labyrinth of surveillance and subjugation. Yumi, a mastermind in the art of deception, wielded her holographic prowess not only to elude the relentless draft enforced by the astronarchy, but to safeguard her sisters from its clutches. In a world where unmarried women were conscripted into the astronarchy's service, Yumi's engineering sanctuary became a haven, shielding her family from the prying eyes of the all-seeing regime. The history of the astronarchy's ascent to power was a tale stained with betrayals, corrupt alliances, and the relentless pursuit of absolute dominion over both technology and society. Yet, in the shadow of her accomplishments, Yumi remained acutely aware that the only sanctuary from the astronarchy's grasp lay in the institution of marriage, a prospect that seemed more like a transition from one prison to another. Okay, so if this wasn't a book, if I opened the first page and this is what I was met with, I would be closing the book. I wouldn't even get to the end of this paragraph, honestly, because I would be gone. It is so info dumpy, so much exposition, so many descriptive words. It's terrible. And why? We're accomplishing everything, right? I mean, we're telling the reader what they need to know about the world, the astronarchy, all the technology, the fact that Yumi is an engineer, she's trying to protect her sisters, how society works. But it is just an info dump, right? It's just a truckload of information dumped on us with no real action or imagery to show us who this person is or why we should care about them. So remember the golden rule here. If it ain't asked, don't answer it. See how I'm answering all these questions that have not even been asked? So that's what bad exposition looks like. Now, exposition through action isn't just about feeding information to the reader. It's about keeping the story in motion while we receive information. Okay, and it's tricky to do this, but it's once you practice it enough, you will get the hang of it. So keeping the reader asking questions, hungry for information, so that when they receive answers, the information is ready to be digested. So let's go back to our two critical questions. What needs to be accomplished for the plot to move forward? And what aspects of the world is the reader asking questions about? So in the beginning of our story, Starborn Deception, we need to see our protagonist, Yumi, actively pursuing her goal and avoiding her fear. Okay. Internal conflict. We want to see the internal conflict immediately if possible. So we need to see why what's happening with the world matters to her on a personal level. And it's okay if we have a few questions, as long as we understand what is immediately happening and why it matters. So then I would say to myself, okay, the goal of this scene, Abby, is to show Yumi trying to protect her sisters from the astronarchy using her unique skill set as an engineer and inventor. Show what's at stake without revealing too much about the world. So can we do this? Let's see. A better example. This is a rough draft mind, but still much better. What if we began the story a different way? With dialogue, with action. I'm scared, Yumi. What if we get caught? Shh, we're not going to get caught. Now stop fidgeting. Immediately we have stakes. 2 lines and we have stakes. In the dim purple light of the underground workshop, Yumi adjusted the magnifier attached to her headset. She'd done hundreds of holographic masks fittings, but never like this. Never on her little sister Mika in the dead of night with trembling hands. It was delicate work at the best of times, disguising holographic sensors on a person's temples to make them unnoticeable to the naked eye. It required total concentration and plenty of light, neither of which Yumi had. I can't see a blasted thing in here, she grumbled irritably. Why don't you just turn on another light? Mika asked. And risk bringing the astronarchy down on our heads? Yumi hissed back.
They have night patrols now, you know. They send their soldiers out to prowl the streets and arrest people like me and you. And you know what they do with unmarried women who are caught trying to dodge the draft? Not to mention hoarding illegal technology. She made a sweeping gesture around them at the workshop scattered with holographic nodes, digiscreens, and circuit boards. They immediately conscript you into the lowest ranks of the Astronarchy. That means we'll be fighting on the front lines, the first to die. Is that what you want? Mika shook her head, anxiety swimming in her eyes. No, Yumi, but there are other ways to avoid conscription without breaking the law. Yumi grunted as she carefully fused the tiny holographic sensor to her sister's temple. You mean marriage? It's not such a bad idea. If you found the right man. Mika smiled dreamily. Someone who looked like General Zento. General Zento is a tyrant and a beast, Yumi said. I don't care how good they make him look in the tabloids. Besides, marriage used to be about love, not protection from being turned into cannon fodder. I know, Mika murmured, but protection is enough for me. Yumi cupped her little sister's face in her hands. I'll protect you, and Kiyomi and Lena. I won't let anyone take my sisters away from me. She smoothed her fingertips over the sensors of Mika's holographic mask. That's why I made you this disguise, so you'll always be safe, no matter where you are. Boom, boom, boom. Fists pounded a door above them. Yumi and Mika jumped when they heard a gruff voice barking the words, Night Watch, open up! Okay, so rough draft, I know, but in 400 words, in just a few paragraphs, we have raised the stakes, we have shown who these characters are on a more personal level, we've even seen some of their personalities clashing with each other. We have Yumi, who's serious and focused, and the older sister, clearly. We have Mika, who's like a little bit more dreamy. She still has some of her like childish fantasies about her. We have these two conflicting elements here. And in the first line, right, the first two lines between those two lines of dialogue, we have stakes. Now, if I were to really write this story and I were to, write multiple drafts of it, I'd make this even stronger. I'd probably add a little bit more to this opening scene. But you see how, like, even with just a few lines of dialogue and action, and we're keeping the story moving forward, we actually have momentum here. We don't have, like, just this omniscient view of the city and how it all became here and all the oppressive government and everything involved. We actually have a scene with action, with dialogue, with these two personalities clashing. We see some of the stakes and we see some of the world building just unfolding through dialogue. And dialogue is a great vehicle to unload some of that world building with. So again, using dialogue to help emphasize what's going on in no uncertain terms without confusing the reader. So try doing this with your own story, or even try just an exercise of a story that you're not even going to write, like I did here with this science fiction. It can be fun just to test out some of these methods and see how can I reveal some of this world through dialogue, through action, without going into a huge info dump. Okay, so prompts, questions to ask yourself here. What needs to be accomplished for the plot to move forward? What aspects of the world is the reader asking questions about? Leveraging the curiosity reward magic ratio, how can I make my reader ask 2 questions and get 1 answer? How does the exposition show what's at stake for the protagonist? That's what matters the most. More than anything else, more than the history, more than the natural laws and the magic, we need to know what's at stake. We need to know immediately, like I just showed you in that excerpt. In the first one, the info dumpy one, we didn't know what was at stake. We just had a bunch of information dumped on us. In the second excerpt, the dialogue and action-filled one, we know what's at stake because we can see the main character, we can see her struggle. She's trying to protect her sisters. They're actually about to get caught. So there's like this action. I would be interested in reading the next paragraph in the next page, the next chapter. That's what you want.
If you enjoyed that extended preview of my training on world building, you can click the link below this video right now to get access to the rest of the teaching. And when you unlock this training, you also get access to my extensive live training archive vault, which includes over 26 hours of in-depth teaching on topics like character creation, plotting, editing, writing romance, publishing and marketing your book, and so much more. I host new live trainings on the first Sunday of every month, so there's lots of value being constantly added to the live training vault, and I hope to see you over there. I think you'll love it. So click the link below this video to unlock access right now and finish watching this extensive live training on world building. I'd love to hear from you, so join the discussion, comment below this video, and tell me what you thought of this training so far. What is your favorite aspect of world building? What do you love about world building the most? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button while you're down there, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos every single Wednesday, and I would love to have you here in the community. Until next week, my friend, rock on. Shh.